It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
And we've been trying to get into this for the past few days, but I don't know. I feel like there's nothing that exciting to say about it, but we'll get into it tonight. There's been a lot of new developments on Venezuela. Some of them from last week, some of them from this week. And as you know, we're on a war footing with Venezuela. It's very obvious. The Trump administration has been fabricating a pretext for this war throughout the entire year. It's been very clear. They have been accusing Venezuela of engaging in narco-terrorism. Narco-terrorism. They say that Venezuela is trafficking fentanyl and cocaine and other drugs into the United States. They say that the Venezuelan government in Caracas is actually operating the cartels that are doing this. So they say that Tren de Aragua and the Cult of the Sun, these are the two big Venezuelan cartels. And they say that these cartels are controlled by the Venezuelan state. They say it's a narco state. Venezuelan's government gets revenue from the drug trade, and that makes them a criminal regime. And this is the very sloppy and ad hoc and basically ridiculous justification for a war. And how does that work? Well, if they could say that Venezuela is engaging in terrorism, then they can make the case that going to war with Venezuela is part of the war on terror. That's a big part of it. The other thing, if they could say that it's a war about drug trafficking, then they can use the Coast Guard and the Navy to interdict what they claim to be drug trafficking vessels. And under that pretext, they can say, we're going to bring all this military power into the Caribbean. We're going to bring F-35 fighter jets and an aircraft carrier to destroy like cigarette boats. Or what do they call them? Cigar boats? You're bringing an aircraft carrier strike group and F-35 fighter jets, the most advanced fighters in the world, to blow up like two guys on a dinghy with some cocaine? It's a pretext to build up the military posture and to start provoking and antagonizing Venezuela. Ironically, it's Washington that's engaging in terrorism. And I know that's a loaded term, but by definition, that's what it is. This is a strategy to terrorize Venezuela and the Venezuelan regime. They're going to put this overwhelming, massive force presence off the coast of Venezuela, and they're going to use it. They're going to bomb these little boats. They're going to fly bombers and fighter jets off the coast of Venezuela. And the purpose is to incite fear. It is to make the Venezuelan military and political apparatus believe that a military strike is imminent. And the message is, we're here, and if we can bomb these boats, we can bomb you, and there's nothing you could do about it. We could bomb your airfields, your airports. We could bomb your governmental headquarters, military headquarters. We can touch you, and you can't do anything. You're completely vulnerable. So that is what has been happening throughout the year, is that slowly and steadily, you have had simultaneous the naval force posture increasing in the Caribbean, such that now we have 25% of the active Navy deployed there. So I believe it's 10 naval vessels there, 10,000 U.S. soldiers, squadrons of F-35 fighter jets, massive troop presence there. At the same time, you also have this justification. You have this flimsy justification for the war where they say, well, Venezuela is engaging in the drug trade. And by the way, that's not even true. Most of the cocaine that comes into the United States comes from Colombian and Mexican cartels. The fentanyl, too. The drugs come from Mexico and Colombia for the most part, not really Venezuela. Venezuela is not one of the major players in the fentanyl, in the manufacture or the distribution of fentanyl in the United States, or cocaine. It's not that they don't do it at all, but they're not one of the major countries doing it. And even the existence of one of these cartels, the Cult of the Sun, a lot of people say that's not even real, and the ties between the government and these cartels is tenuous. But again, the argument goes, here's the chain of reasoning. If the Venezuelan regime is funded by and in bed with or managing the cartels, and if the cartels are smuggling drugs into the United States, and if those drugs are killing Americans, then we could argue that's a form of terrorism. For Americans to die from fentanyl is a form of terrorism because someone's dying. We can run that up the flagpole. That's Nicolas Maduro's fault. He's the chief terrorist. So if we go off their coast and bomb all their vessels and maybe eventually even bomb their government, well, that's part of the global war on terror. We're defending ourselves at self-defense. And of course, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous because the real reason that Trump is doing this, we have to speak in terms of the players involved. The United States does nothing. Decision makers in government do things. And the decision makers in government that are relevant here are Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And since the withdrawal of Mike Waltz, since he was dismissed, Rubio is also the National Security Advisor. So he heads up the National Security Council. That makes Rubio a very powerful Secretary of State. He has all the responsibilities and the powers of the chief diplomatic officer, but he also has all the intelligence and power of the National Security Advisor. That's all part of his portfolio. And if you know anything about Rubio, you know that he comes from South Florida. He's Cuban. His parents fled. Now, everyone thinks that his parents fled the Cuban Revolution, the communists. In reality, his parents fled the previous regime, the U.S. puppet government. So he says, I hate communism. My parents fled communism. No, I believe they fled the previous regime. But anyway, Rubio's parents fled Cuba because of the turbulence there in the 50s and 60s. They settled in Florida, where there's a thriving Cuban-American community. And Rubio, ever since he was a kid, has this axe to grind against Castro and Cuba and communism. Hates Cuba. Well, more specifically, hates the communist government of Cuba, hates Castro, hates the regime. And you might say, well, what does Cuba have to do with Venezuela? Well, Venezuela is a socialist state also. And when Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela in 99, when they had their Bolivarian revolution some years later, they became a very critical strategic ally of Cuba. And they're engaged in a very important relationship where Venezuela gives Cuba oil and Cuba gives them doctors. They have intelligence sharing. Cuban intelligence is spying on Venezuela's military class to make sure that they don't mutiny against Nicolas Maduro. So they rely on each other heavily. And Rubio has a very expansive view of this new foreign policy in the Caribbean. He believes that if we stick it to Maduro, Maduro is the most powerful socialist, you could say revisionist, rogue power in the Western Hemisphere, in the Caribbean. Out of all of them, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela's probably the richest and most powerful, as oil, gold, and close contacts, relationships with Russia, China, Iran. Rubio believes that if we topple Maduro in Caracas, then there's going to be dominoes falling in reverse. You take out Maduro, and then maybe you can roll up the communist regime in Cuba, and maybe then you can roll up the communist regime in Nicaragua. And this would be a victory for him as a Cuban, as an anti-communist, but also it'd be a big victory for him going into 2028. He could take credit and say, I'm a Reagan-esque figure. I'm a Reagan-esque diplomat. I defeated communism in the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean. And to tell you the truth, if that was achievable, that would be impressive. That would be notable. But that's a big if. And the reason he is driven to do this is because he is an anti-communist Cuban. Just like how Ben Shapiro wants us to die for Israel against Iran, Rubio wants us to die for Cuba, apparently, against Venezuela. This is part of his, Cuban thing. And I would add, this is contra other people in the administration. Rick Grenell, who is one of Trump's envoys, has been negotiating with the government in Venezuela, and at one point during the year had actually reached a deal with Maduro. And the deal would look something like this. Over a period of time, Maduro would eventually step down and transition to a new government. In the meantime, the United States would get a piece of all new oil, all new gold. We would get control over their current oil and gold and other critical minerals. And Venezuela would realign themselves away from Beijing and towards Washington. That sounds like a perfect deal. That's a great deal. And by the way, I think that would only make common sense because the rest of South America is doing the same thing. Lula in Brazil has had a rapprochement with Trump. Argentina canceled their accession to BRICS and is close with Trump. Bolivia just elected a non-left president that wants to realign with the United States. In Ecuador and Peru, they're doing the same thing. In El Salvador, and in those other regimes where they're resistant to Trump, Trump is putting the screws in them, like in Colombia, in Panama. So for Maduro to say that, I mean, it's kind of a good deal. It means that if he's true to his word, we get Venezuela and we get a managed transition. We don't get a tumultuous regime change where the government collapses and it's guerrilla warfare and there's another exodus of 8 million Venezuelans. We get some kind of control and it's managed and it's over time. I mean, that sounds like a good deal, but there's intense disagreement inside the administration over the approach here. Rick Grenell wants the deal so that we can focus on China. We don't have to invade and do regime change and then we break it, we buy it, we're in there forever. Rick Grenell says, let's make a deal. That's a model for other countries. And then let's go somewhere else. Rubio says, no, we're hanging out in the Caribbean. We're going to knock down Maduro hard. Then we're going to knock down Cuba. Then we're going to knock down Nicaragua. So if you thought we're biting off more than we could chew for Venezuela, you don't even know the half of it. It's about so much more. They don't even want to just stop at Venezuela. They want to go further. And if this sounds familiar, it's because it is. This is the same kind of thinking behind the war in Iraq, which is that if we go and invade Iraq and topple that government, well, then there would be a domino effect. That was the idea. We didn't go into Iraq simply to destroy the WMD that allegedly was there. It wasn't simply because Saddam was a pariah. There was an idea that if we toppled Saddam, we could plant the seed of democratic liberalism, liberal, whatever you want to call it, liberal capitalism. We were going to plant the flag of freedom in Iraq, and then Syria and Iran and the other countries would follow. And the Middle East would become a liberal place, and pursuant to democratic peace theory would no longer be a problem for Europe or the United States. That was the idea. And look at how that turned out. We went into Iraq. Did that work? It didn't even work there. We didn't even get a democracy there. We went there and then it started a religious civil war. And then we're getting blown to smithereens in irregular guerrilla warfare for 10 years. And then we get ISIS and then it blows up. And then the same thing happens. The only thing that spread was misery. And now Al-Qaeda runs Syria and Hezbollah runs Iraq. So you're worse off, actually. What are the odds that in Venezuela it's going to be any different? And it's not apples to apples. Venezuela is very different than Iraq. It's closer to home, militarily weaker, no WMDs. They're not Muslim. On some level, it's more justifiable because it's within our legitimate sphere of influence, and therefore you could argue it's about national security. But still, all of those concerns are still valid here, which is to say, you go to war in Venezuela and topple the government. Okay, what comes on the next day? You're going to get Machado? And is she going to be able to take control of the apparatus? Are all of Maduro's officers going to go away? Are they going to support her? There's no evidence that that's the case. There's no evidence that this new regime they want to build has any legitimacy. And forget about legitimacy with the people. What about with the security state? There's no evidence that that has happened. And what's more, the strategy for Cuba and Venezuela is that they know they can't control their airspace. They know they can't control the coast. Their strategy in the event of a war is to then blend into the population and launch guerrilla warfare. And this isn't like Panama in 1989. This is a big country with a lot of cities, a lot of densely populated cities, a dispersed population with a difficult terrain. It's a lot of jungle. 29 million people, 30 million people. So the idea you're going to go in there with 10,000, 20,000 troops, knock over the government, and then it's going to be smooth sailing, there's no evidence that it's going to be that way. I don't feel good about that. And then they want to go further. They want to go and attack other countries. Now, these are the new developments. The new developments in the story are that Trump is now talking about striking targets on the ground. He had a phone call with Maduro, and allegedly there was a proffer there. So Trump said that if Maduro steps down immediately, then he can escape, but then that's it. Like, he can't get immunity, he can't get, there's no clemency involved in that. Trump is saying you can flee and we won't kill you. He says, but otherwise we're going to kill you. And Maduro says, no, I want to stick around for a couple of years, or I want immunity, or I want to be able to get safe passage. Those were the results of the phone call. And this is a story from the New York Times. It says, quote, President Trump warned airlines and pilots on Saturday that the airspace near Venezuela was closed. In a post on social media, he wrote, all airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers, he said, this is addressed to them, the airspace is closed in its entirety. He did not go into further detail in his post, but it came after he warned on Thursday night that the United States could very soon expand its attacks on boats thought to be carrying drugs in the waters off Venezuela to targets inside the country itself. The U.S. boat strikes have killed more than 80 people since early September. Earlier this year, a handful of foreign carriers had canceled flights to Venezuela after the Federal Aviation Administration issued a safety warning about the country. The United States has built up a substantial military presence in the Caribbean to put pressure on Venezuela. On Friday, the New York Times reported Mr. Trump had spoken by phone with Nicolas Maduro. The conversation took place late in the week and included a discussion about a possible meeting in the United States between the two leaders, although there are no plans at the moment for such a meeting. The phone call between Mr. Trump and Maduro, which included Secretary of State Marco Rubio, came days before the State Department officially designated Maduro as the leader of what the administration considers a drug cartel that is also a foreign terrorist organization, Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns. And so this is where I think we are in the war, to sort of bring it up to speed to today. So you have this deployment off the coast, and let's talk about what's actually there. You got a carrier, you've got about a dozen naval vessels, 10,000 troops, F-35s. This is not an invasion force. Venezuela's got 30 million people. Like I said, it's a big country, lots of cities. A comparable example might be Panama. The United States invaded Panama in December 1989 with about 20,000 soldiers. Population, fraction of the size. The amount of territory, fraction of the size. They have one city, all the people are there. This is a totally different ballgame. And you always have to compare the specifications, size of the population, the amount of major cities and where there might be strategic targets, the type of terrain. And so if you had 20,000 soldiers to liberate Panama, and the fighting lasted about a week, I don't think 10,000 can liberate Venezuela. That doesn't look to me like an invasion force. So what is this force posture for? It is to control the air. It is to do these effects-based warfare tactics, which is to say they're bringing in sea power and air power, huge guns and missiles, sea to ground missiles, as well as guns and the aircraft, because what they intend on doing probably is taking control of the airports, taking control of the runways, the airstrips, military commercial airports, and then they control the airspace, probably bombing strategic targets, bombing military bases, other strategic targets, whether that's resources or ports or whatever. They're going to drop payload, maybe decapitation strike. They're going to kill the leadership, top brass in the military. And then with their small force, they're going to come in to establish law and order. Maybe special forces or the 10,000 troops, maybe more than that, will deploy to go and find Maduro, find the other top lieutenants, make sure they're accounted for and either killed or captured, and then they're going to maintain law and order in the anarchy and oversee the transition. That's probably what that force is there to do. And if you've been paying attention over the past 10 years, Trump's strategy, it's brinksmanship. It's brinksmanship and it's maximum pressure. And this is what we've seen in North Korea, in Syria, in Iran, in Russia, and this is what we've seen in Venezuela also, which is you use a combination of soft power and gunboat diplomacy to increase pressure to the maximum level. And so what does that mean? For example, with North Korea, we already had more sanctions than we could even levy on North Korea. There weren't any more sanctions we could apply. How do we hurt them economically? We went to Beijing, their only trading partner, their biggest trading partner. And we said, China, if you want to work with us, you need to help us denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. You need to put the screws in North Korea. And so China brought economic pain to bear on North Korea in a way that we couldn't do it unilaterally. So there's an economic pressure. Then Trump put 2 carrier strike groups off the coast of Korea and said, my button is bigger and mine works and you're going to see fire and fury and the storm is coming. And the idea was to create, this is called brinksmanship. It's bringing them to the brink of war using maximum pressure, using that soft power, economic, diplomatic, psychological tactics, as well as gunboat diplomacy, bringing the visible presence of U.S. force to bear on these countries, demonstrating it to them, and then offering them a choice. We can meet and have a détente. We can normalize relations, which they did with North Korea, and discuss, or we can go to war. But I don't think that Trump actually wants all of these regime change wars. I don't think he actually wants invasions. This is the tactic. You see it in Iran also. You see it in Russia. It's these levers. It's calibrating your approach, calibrating your openness to diplomacy, signaling at various times an openness to negotiate, an openness to meet, an openness to talk or normalize, but also calibrating so that they have a fear that you might credibly destroy them, using the economic tools at your disposal to create destabilization, to create pain, stress on the regime, but also then to incite fear by, again, bringing down the force, demonstrating the force capability of the United States. And I think that's what he's doing in Venezuela. Very obvious. Because if you break it down over the course of the year, first, he puts a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head to incentivize those top lieutenants to betray him and give him up to the United States. Increases the sanctions on Venezuela. Brands them a terrorist organization, giving them a legal justification. Starts deploying naval assets, first to Puerto Rico, then to the Virgin Islands, Trinidad and Tobago. Now they're off the coast of Venezuela. Then he starts dropping bombs on the boats. Then he starts flying the bombers ever closer to Venezuela's coastline. Then he says, we're going to close your airspace. We could strike on the ground at any minute. As an economic as well as a psychological effect. One, it's going to grind a lot of trade to a halt, but also it's going to make them fear that action is imminent. And fear makes people collapse. The regime is going to collapse under the weight of that pressure. That's the idea. And what I think is happening right now is that, like I said earlier, you've got this intense disagreement inside the administration, where Rubio is certainly pushing for the regime change. He wants to go in and bomb Venezuela, topple Maduro. That will send a message to Iran. That will send a message to Russia. It might have ramifications for Cuba, for Nicaragua, for Panama, for Colombia, for that matter. Because diplomacy is, with the United States, is global. It's a global chessboard. I think Rubio wants to topple the regime. I think Rick Grenell wants a deal. And maybe Trump is using them to play off of each other as a good cop, bad cop. Maduro knows this. Maduro knows Rubio. Maduro knows Grenell. Maduro's regime is negotiating with Grenell and talking with Trump. But they also know that they could get Rubio, and what is going to come with Rubio is probably Maduro's head on a stick. So I think that's part of it too. Now, it could be the case that military action is imminent. It also could be the case that a deal is imminent, and they might be working out the details of the safe passage of Maduro to Qatar or some other third country. While this is going on, at the same time, you have the Democrats in the media and Congress, and they're raising all sorts of concerns about the alleged second strike on one of these drug trafficking vessels in September. They say that when Trump authorized Pete Hegseth to authorize a general to take out one of these drug smuggling boats, that they dropped a bomb on the boat. They saw that the boat capsized and there were survivors, and they finished off the survivors. They basically executed them. Even though their vessel wasn't seaworthy, they dropped another bomb and they killed these people slipping into the ocean. And the Democrats are saying that's a war crime because you're attacking people that are vulnerable, they're not seaworthy, and so they don't actually pose a threat. You've just executed people that are ostensibly unarmed and defenseless. And so now the media, and this has been all over the New York Times, the Washington Post all week, and the Democrats in Congress have raised articles of impeachment. They're saying this is a war crime and an impeachable offense, that whoever authorized this, they broke the law, whether it's the defense secretary, the general, the officer, or President Trump. And I at first glance, I think it's ridiculous, but then I think the reason they're doing it is to slow down the tempo of the Trump administration on the war. They're trying to pump the brakes. Why would they be into this 4 months, 3 months after the fact? That strike happened on September 2nd, September 3rd. It's December 4th, December 5th. This is December 4th show, but it's 2 a.m., so it's December 5th. Why would they wait until this week to raise that? And why raise it at all? I think they're trying to slow down the tempo of the administration so that we don't rush into a war without congressional authorization, without oversight. And it's maybe a warning flare. You can't take out a drug vessel that way. You can't take out a whole country without approval from Congress. This might be Congress flexing its muscle. So I think that complicates things also in Trump's playbook here, because Trump likes to act quickly and decisively, which I like, and he's able to do that for a period of time. And then what always happens is the Democratic state catches up to him with all their rules and all their oversight and everything, and that's what it looks like is happening here. So that's a situation as it stands in Venezuela. I've been very clear about this from the beginning. We can maintain at once that Venezuela is part of our legitimate sphere of influence. People are always saying, why don't we focus on the national security threats at home? What does Iran have to do with us? And I totally agree with that. And that's a salient argument to make when people are talking about war in Yemen, in Iran, in these types of countries, in Ukraine even. But Venezuela is in the Western Hemisphere. It's right across the Gulf of Mexico. It's not far. And I would consider both North and South America our legitimate sphere of influence. Anything that happens there could be threatening to the United States. What protects us and insulates us from other countries is the oceans. We are protected from invasion. We are protected from non-nuclear powers that don't have a strategic air force or strategic nuclear capability. We're protected from them by distance because of the oceans. Iran can't hurt us because we're separated by an ocean. They don't have missiles that can hit us. They don't have an air force that can hit us. They can't threaten us. They can't invade us. It'd be tricky for China to invade us, for Japan to invade us. But that is not the case with Central and South America. Those countries, they could theoretically pose a threat to the United States because they're not separated from us by an ocean. They're connected to our country by land and by a not insignificant, or rather, or what is the right wording for that? By a pretty insignificant distance over water too, the Gulf of Mexico. So people like to say, well, we should stay out of it. I disagree. I think this is our business. And when you look at what the Maduro regime has done, forget about the fact that he's socialist. I don't really care about that. Who really cares? It's his country. They have national sovereignty. What I care about is the fact that he is aligned with U.S. adversaries. And maybe if it was one country, it wouldn't be a threat, but he's allied with Cuba, Nicaragua, China, Russia, Iran. And to the extent that they are working with Iran's military, to the extent that they are working with China and Russia, and they get Russian weapons and they get Chinese investment, we are fighting a new Cold War, a new Monroe Doctrine in South America. We're trying to expel China from these Latin American countries. So why are we going to kick out the Chinese in Argentina and try to kick them out in Brazil and in all these other places, but we're going to let them have a foothold in Venezuela? Dual use infrastructure. They're going to have the oil there. They're going to control the gold there. They might build drones there. Why would we let them do this? We're going to be at war with them. We're going to let them exist across the pond like that? I don't think so. So at the minimum, it is in our national security interest that we should not allow Venezuela to take the side of U.S. strategic rivals, which is what China and Russia are. And Maduro has very conscientiously created an axis with them. He's in league with them. And that's not to say that he's going to invade America or attack America, but theoretically, in a war with China and Russia, he might be used to attack the United States, or be used against the United States in some way. And I don't know why we would tolerate that. So I am in favor of U.S. intervention in Venezuela, although not necessarily regime change. I believe that America has strategic interests. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter how we pursue them. I still think that we should pursue a reasonable and restrained foreign policy, the policy of restraint. I'm in favor of that. So I don't think we should go in guns blazing and take out Maduro and then all these other countries. But I do think that this is the right strategy. Maximum pressure, a negotiated settlement. All we want is the oil, the gold. We want your allegiance, and we want Maduro out. And that's it. And you could be a Bolivarian socialist republic. I really don't care. And I don't even think we need to kill the guy. I don't think we need a war. I don't think that would be good for the United States to destabilize this country. You're going to get another exodus. You might get guerrilla warfare. It might bleed over into these other states and create a security challenge for Brazil, for Colombia, for Guyana, certainly. And by the way, there's a lot of unexploited resources right there in Guyana, in the Essequibo. So, we want that too. And we want that too. And that's perfectly reasonable. So I definitely fall on the side of Rick Grinnell on this one. We should have a negotiated settlement. Let's get the allegiance of the government there. Let's get access to their raw materials. If we can go, and think about it this way. People say, how does that benefit us? If we could go into Venezuela, we can make their oil production efficient. Their oil production is less than half of what it should be because of sanctions, because of corruption, because of inefficiency. If we got down to Venezuela and we started pumping their oil, that would be a huge energy boon to the United States, and we would get all of it. Global oil prices would fall. That would hurt Russia. It would be beneficial for American consumers. We would secure the energy for our increasing electricity needs. And not only that, if we have a stable government in Venezuela that we're allied with, we can then extract all the energy that's in Guyana also, because they've just discovered a ton of resources there too. It's a win-win. So you do it smartly. You do it in a restrained way. You do it with regime change as the last resort. Only necessary in extraordinary circumstances. And I think that's the America First foreign policy. But I'll tell you what, I disagree with all these libertarians and leftists that want to bitch about, leave everybody alone. And they say that we should keep our nose out of there. That's their stuff. Fuck it, it's not their stuff. This hemisphere belongs to us. That's what it is to be America First. America First means we're in charge. America First does not mean we're going to sit with our hands in our lap at the United Nations and listen to third world people bitch and moan and take all their own shit. That's not America First. When did multilateralism and internationalism become? It's totally the opposite. America First is we are going to march around this entire half of the globe and we're going to tell everybody how it's going to be. That's America First. We're in charge. It is good to be in charge. And people don't realize that. We get to be a prosperous nation. We get to have a relative degree of autonomy and independence because we are powerful. Other countries get bossed around because they're not powerful. Look at like Germany, France, Italy. They get bossed around by the United States because we're bigger than them. They're dependent on us militarily, economically, so they have less freedom. They have less prosperity. They're getting killed by this war in Ukraine. Germany, they will not survive this. And their leaders have no choice because they are a suzerain of Washington. And people need to understand that it sounds great when you say, we're a republic, not an empire. But it's like an empire is what procures for us all these resources that make us rich. And what makes us rich is what makes us powerful. And what makes us powerful is what allows us to secure these resources. And unless you're ready to give up your autonomy, your sovereignty, our way of life, you might say that's happening regardless. I'd agree with you. But if we want to have, in any scenario, sovereignty and prosperity, we're going to need to have the empire. I don't want to give that up. I think it's ridiculous. And it's just ideologically not even right wing. People go and say, yeah, so Venezuela is going to take their oil. Good for them. And it's like, don't get me wrong. Yeah, they should profit from their oil too, but they should sell it to us. They can't be fucking around buying weapons from our enemies. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. You can make your own oil and you can use it for your own social programs, but you're going to sell it to us and we're going to tell you how much you're going to make of it. Because we're bigger than you, and that's the way it's going to go. We're not going to sit with our hands in our laps. These people are criminals. Nicolas Maduro, that whole regime, they're criminals. They're crooks. And we're going to go and sit in the United Nations and have them lecture. The devil spoke here yesterday. Fuck you. Who are you and what army, pal? So I'm America first, but I just think we need to be a smarter, more restrained empire that works for our own interests. And that's why I feel this way about Venezuela. I know a lot of people disagree. They've been huffing the Ron Paul stuff. I know Dave Smith is one of them, Ryan Grimm talking about colonialism in Haiti. It's like, give me a break, dude. They have 65 IQ. You think it's because of neo-colonialism that they eat dirt? Give me a break. That's just not right wing. Anyway, but that's that. We're going to move on. We're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what you guys have to say about all this. Let's see. An empire, if you can keep it. That's me. When me and Dan Bilzerian and Ye and Steven Crowder, when we leave the next constitutional convention, when we leave the Imperial Senate, they're going to say, what kind of government did you create? An empire, if you can keep it. That's what we'll say. And then everyone will clap. It will be based.
Pretense or real? All right, let's get into the second part of this show. We're going to focus on our involvement with Venezuela and what this conflict could potentially be, why it's happening, what's Nick's opinion, and I'll give you a little bit of obviously, I'll give you a little bit of my opinion. Let's just start here. All right, so Nick believes it's a pretense, which pretty much is made up, false reason, a disingenuous reason for us to get more involved in a war or a regime change or whatever affair, whatever involvement I should say we'll have with Venezuela. So Nick actually pointed out that it's Washington that could potentially be seen as engaging in terrorism and believes that, us bombing these, what did Nick call them? He said they're using F-35 jets to blow up people on a dinghy, to blow up dinghies. And he believes that, that's pretty much engaging in terrorism and says that the purpose is to incite fear with the Venezuelan country. So I wasn't really familiar with the whole background of Rubio with his parents fleeing from Cuba in the 50s and 60s, but him trying to act as if he fled from the communist regime, which I believe was a bit later on. Based on my research, my intense research with watching the movie Scarface. But let's actually stick to the notes so I'm not going off telling y'all something that isn't true or that's just wrong and not consistent as far as history. But so there's this guy, and I want to focus on this guy also, the guy Rick, what was his name? Rick Grinnell. Let me go to my notes real quick. Hold on one second. One second, because I looked all this stuff up and I want to make sure. Yeah, so Rick Grinnell. So he seems to be the guy that's negotiating with Maduro that still believes that, hey, we can figure out a diplomatic solution to this, while Rubio seems to be the one that's pressing the issue and just saying, like, nah, we got to destroy Maduro and then we're moving on to the rest of the region. Anybody that's associated with any communist regime. And there's a lot of just thoughts around this conversation. And, I wrote down a bunch of notes, but the things that I really want to focus on is that Nick believes that Maduro and Venezuela are our business because they're in our hemisphere and they have relationships with our adversaries. And I think this is a very slippery slope, a very dangerous way of looking at things. And I couldn't help but, as I'm hearing Nick discuss some of these things, to think about Vladimir Putin. Here we believe that it's okay for us to get involved in Venezuela's affairs because they're in our hemisphere and because they're working with our adversaries. So therefore, we have the green light now to go in there and do whatever we want to take their natural resources, the oil, the gold, and force them to do more business with us. Like, is that really the approach that we want to take? I don't know. But the reason why it reminded me of Vladimir Putin, because we'll say Vladimir Putin is such a despicable person because he invaded Ukraine. But meanwhile, Ukraine is on Russia's border. And if Ukraine was in the process of joining NATO, which is Vladimir Putin and Russia's adversaries, enemies, and they're on their actual border, then I would expect that same logic to apply when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, with us going down and invading Venezuela. So I'm a little bit thrown off when it comes to a lot of this stuff. It seems like Nick's stance is more so like, absolutely, we should get involved, but he's leaning more in the Rick Grinnell, more diplomatic approach way. But one, is that even possible, especially when it comes to our government? Is it possible for us to push a lot of these things? And even is that okay? Is that right? Is that the righteous thing to get involved with? It pretty much reminds me of something that Nick said maybe a couple months ago on a show when he was saying, I think he was talking about Venezuela, and it was either Argentina, I think it was Venezuela, where he was saying that it's only your gold if you can protect it. It's not your gold. He made this statement, I forget exactly what it was, but I remember clowning about it, where he was saying, like, yeah, these people are walking barefoot on land that has gold underneath it. Like, that's not your gold. It's only your gold if you can protect it. That's the mindset of a colonizer. I'm being real. That's the mindset of a colonizer. That's no different than Doctrine of Discovery. That's no different than Manifest Destiny. That's no different than Christopher Columbus. That's no different than us going over and feeling like, oh, if they're not living the way that we believe people should be living and embracing our culture, and if they're not praising the same God that we're praying, we have the right to go in there and do whatever it is we want with that country. Like, is that not the same mindset? Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can also tell me if I'm being soft, if you think that this is a soft mindset that I have or a soft approach to things. I'm not for war. I'm not for violence. So a lot of these things that occur, I tend to look at it through a lens of, what is this going to ultimately lead to? Do I trust our government to even do something like this without it being casualties? Look at what's already happening. They said that over 80 people have died based on these boat strikes so far. And based on my knowledge, I don't know how they're confirming whether or not these are actually drug mules, these dinghies that they're using these F-35 planes to destroy. I don't know. To my knowledge, I can't confirm. I don't know if the government can confirm, especially after you blow a boat up, whether or not they actually had drugs on them. It seems to be they're just going on, hey, we think that they could potentially be a drug mule, so therefore we're going to fire on them and blow up their boat. But in all actuality, I don't even think the government even cares if they're actually a gun or a drug mule. I don't think that they care. I think that they're doing this to prove a point. I think that what a lot of politicians do is they justify certain actions, even though they may not think that those actions are principled. They'll put that on the back burner as far as their principles, because they believe that overall it still serves their purpose. And I want to be very clear when I say their purpose, because I do think that it's focused on their purpose, their agenda, whether it's Rubio and wanting to get back for his family or George Bush with his dad and the involvement, what got us back involved in the war with Iraq. All of these different things, I think that these are things that put the interest of the politicians first rather than the American people. And we think that it amazes me how the same people that are so religious tend to be not very spiritual and understand how all of this stuff is connected. It's like you're so religious, but you think that it's okay for us to go in and do what we want with another country just because we're powerful enough to do it, even though we would never allow any other country to do that to us. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. And perhaps that's just the energy that America gives off right now. And perhaps, I mean, it's hard to complain about, Israel flexing whatever power and leverage they have on America and say that, hey, this is wrong. They're controlling our government, but then give the green light to us doing something in Venezuela just because we have the power and leverage to do whatever we want there. And it's in our personal interest. It's a colonizing mindset. This is what I keep saying. Like when you have a foundation where you excuse behavior or excuse genocide, excuse ethnically cleansing, excuse violating God's commandments in order to get something that you want. And then once you get it, now you try to live holier than thou or say that you're living by standards that you just violated in order to get the gold, get the trophy, the land that you wanted. To me, that's still giving about, it's sending out a demonic energy that eventually is going to come back and visit us. We cannot do all this bullying and creating all this destruction around the world and expect that not to one day visit us. We can't complain and cry and still talk about 9/11, about, oh my God, this is so terrible. We're doing all this stuff when we're doing all of this craziness or supporting it, or at the very least being complicit and supporting it financially with it happening around the world. It's not realistic. I'm not talking about from a feeling standpoint or this is not right, we shouldn't be doing this. There is that aspect to it, but I'm talking about it just from a spiritual perspective, a godly perspective, an energy perspective. The things that we put out into this world eventually are going to come back and visit us, right? You put out bad energy, you're going to get bad energy in return. You put out demonic energy, what do we think's coming back to us? So I don't understand why we think that we can constantly get involved in creating these scenarios with these different countries that are either going to lead to regime change or bullying them in different ways, taking their natural resources, and think that that's just okay. Unless you're just cool with being a bully. If we're just cool with being a bully and saying like, hey, this is why we get our power. This is why we're America. We got the power. So we're the bully. We're going to bully and do whatever we want with all these different countries, especially if you're in our hemisphere. We're going to run stuff, and that's what it's going to be. And if somebody's ever the bigger, badder bully above us, then I guess they can, do whatever they do. That's the energy that we give off. I don't rock with it. I don't like it because I'm looking at it from a perspective of humanity first, perhaps. I don't just look at it. It doesn't stop for me at America first. I totally understand how certain countries, you prioritize where you are. Prioritize where you are. But that doesn't mean that I look at it from a tribal standpoint where I take care of my home, and once my home is taken care of, now I can pick and choose what to do with other, like, you know what I mean? It's where I want to create negative energy with other homes. It's more so like, hey, take care of your homes based on these standards that we set. So we have these humane principles, these standards and principles of humanity. And then what we require is for each country to police their own, no different than we look at when it comes to good cops policing bad cops. Black people calling out black culture, not just waiting for white people to call it out. This same type of policing in different areas. When we talk about, hey, it would be nice to hear some Israelis or some Jewish people call out what's going on, this genocide with Israel and Palestine. So we talk about it all the time, but my mindset of America first doesn't mean that, hey, we're the bully, so therefore we can do whatever we want with any country in this hemisphere. I don't rock with that. I don't rock with that. And I would caution a lot of y'all to rock with that as well, if that's what you're rocking with, because when the shoe's on the other foot, when the rabbit's got the gun, when we may not be in the powerful position that we are currently in, we may shift. And this may cause a lot of our future generations to one day have to deal with the problems that we've been creating. So therefore, when that energy returns, it may not return when we're in such a powerful position. What if that energy that we give off right now while we're in power comes back to us when we're in a bit of a more vulnerable position, and now our younger generations are in leadership and we may be far out of here? What are we setting them up for? We're setting them up to get bullied in the same way that we bully other countries, perhaps. So I don't like putting out that energy, not just for the selfish reasons of saying like, hey, this is going to eventually be bad for us, but just putting out that energy. Like that's not just what I align with. So I look at maybe life, spirituality, and a bit differently than most, but I just believe in treating others the way that you want to be treated. If I don't want you bullying me because I don't think that that's principled, I don't want to be bullying other people. That's how I look at it. Nick's mindset is different. Nick said that anybody in our hemisphere, because we're America first, because we're the bully, we should be able to have whatever involvement in their affairs that we want, what's beneficial for us. And he says, but that doesn't mean regime change, and the only reason why he says it doesn't mean regime change, because he doesn't think that that's honestly beneficial for us. So even if we agree on the fact that, okay, we shouldn't do the regime change, it still is for different reasons. So y'all let me know what y'all thoughts are on it. Y'all let me know what y'all thoughts are on it. But this goes back to where it's very easy it's a lot easier for people to join the United States military. And even when you think about the fact that we had lower people, not as many people wanting to get into the military. And this is something that Pete Hegseth was getting a lot of credit for initially in the beginning of the administration, when Pete Hegseth, was the guy that was going to bring the numbers up and a lot more people were signing up for the military. You got to give Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump credit for that. But what I want to caution us is, when we're not the biggest and baddest army in the world, when we're not the biggest, and we may not even be now, to be totally real, but when we're not the most powerful army, when we're not as powerful as we are right now, do we think that people are going to be more inclined to sign up? I don't know. Maybe people will take pride in it and saying like, you know what? Things are down bad more than ever. So therefore we got to make sure that we're getting bullied. So maybe that will be the rallying cry that allows more and more Americans to sign up for war. But it's going to be a different type of energy that we're going to a war when we're the ones that are more likely to lose, perhaps, when the odds are not in our favor, when other people got just as much powerful guns and perhaps more powerful technology than what we have when it comes to weaponry. So this is energy. This is energy. This is why I believe in just treating others the way that we want to be treated, because it's the one thing that consistently, when you look at it 100 years out, 1,000 years out, the cycle as it continues to repeat, if you just have that mindset of treating others and doing unto others as we want them to do unto us, it's going to be that reminder. It's going to be those guide rails. It's going to give us that compass to follow, which is making sure that we're always checking our actions based on what we would want done to us. So y'all take it or leave it when it comes to that. That's my mindset on it. I don't like us getting involved. And even if we are getting involved, it seems like we have the wrong mindset approaching the situation. It's like a cop that walks up to a situation where certain cops will come up to a situation and be, very respectful, under control, and want to diffuse the situation, while other cops we've seen, they'll go up to what's going on and be real aggressive, and the energy is just different and it's more of a bullying mindset. I don't think that should be our approach when we're getting involved in other foreign affairs. If we are getting involved in another country, then perhaps it should be a different approach to it, where it's like we're actually going in there with good intentions of helping the people in that country, rather than acting as if we're helping the people in that country, when we're just going to destabilize their government, have more and more corruption. Even though Nick talks about Maduro and Venezuela, about their corruption. Nick, you talk all the time about the American corruption. They stole an election, according to you. So perhaps we should worry about our own corruption before we start justifying getting involved in other countries because they have their corruption. I don't like it like that. I don't think that it makes sense for us to do that. So eventually those chickens going to come home to roost. Eventually those chickens are going to come home to roost. So I would recommend that we check that mindset, check our attitude in a lot of these situations. That would be my recommendation. And I'm not sure if I finished my last thought, but I think y'all get the point. I think y'all get the point on where I stand on a lot of this. Your intent when you go into a lot of these situations matters. So if we have an intent of going in and helping the people, that's a bit different than going in there with the personal intent of selfish intent, I should say, of, yeah, they got resources. They got natural resources. We need that. We need that oil and gold. Yeah, we need that. Oh, they're working with our ops. Oh, no, we can't have that. We're going to address that. We're going to do whatever we want. We're going to extort them in whatever way necessary to give us power compared to everybody else. And once you have this power play of whoever has the most power, you know, that mindset, going back to what Nick said, it's only your gold if you can protect it. If we operate on that mindset, then we're operating in our most beastly nature. This is the opposite of our godly nature. This is the opposite of our Christly nature, Christ-like nature. We're operating like beasts. We're operating like beasts. Who's the strongest in the jungle? They set the rules. So to each their own. To each their own. We'll see. It's all good, like I said, until the rabbit has the gun. It's all good while we're the most powerful country in the world. It's all good. But things may change, and we may be setting up future generations to cash the checks that we're writing. And I'm not sure that they're going to have the capability to do so. So on that note, y'all know what it is. Appreciate y'all continuing to rock out. Appreciate y'all continuing to just tap in. You know, I appreciate all the comments, even though I don't get to all of them a lot of times because what I'm doing right here takes a good amount of time. So I'll try to do better. I'm trying to always just pump out as much content as possible. But appreciate y'all nonetheless. As always, like, subscribe, turn your notifications on. That's going to help us control the algorithm, making sure that we're seeing these videos. I've been getting a lot of messages from people who are saying that they subscribe, but they don't get the notification. So let's just make sure that if our notifications are on, maybe turn them off and then turn them right back on. Maybe we just need to reset the system. I'm not going to throw any things out there about YouTube or anything like that, but perhaps we just need to reset it ourselves and remind them that, hey, this is the algorithm that we want. And as always, as I said on the last video with Candace Owens, my bias may be playing in to my perspective on it and not allowing me to be as objective as I like. So if that's the case, let me know. Hold me accountable. I'm always for that. So on that note, I'll see y'all soon.
It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there. Let's figure out a split that's honorable and fair. Tell me where you trying to take it. Bro, I'll meet you there. 1600 Penn, Wash, DC. Swear I saw the vision riding through the DMV. I envision prayers, but I could do VP. Hillbilly Elegy, fuck, I look like JD. Shout out my cheat code, Dave and Karen raised me. And my big bro, a nuclear family.
And they don't like that. Strong fathers in the crib, BLM fought that. LBJ society created all that. Victimhood mentality, I can't embrace that. And everything they taught in school, assume it's all cap. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Ain't no introduction, just some fun facts. In case you were wondering, I am that.
I know you heard me hit it 3 times for Dr. Umar. Shout out to Umar, man. We ain't kicking nobody when they down. And shout out to everybody that continues to show love, support, appreciating the message that I'm giving y'all along with the bro Nick's message. We gonna keep pushing, man. And shout out to the haters too, cause y'all in the comments heavy too. y'all the ones that gave me the inspiration to create this song. They kept saying like, who's the random black guy in the corner? I am.